Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to my channel. My name is Bridget. I'm a nurse practitioner, and today we have a very special guest, Lori. Lori, if you could go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. I'm Lori Brown. I'm a registered nurse and an attorney. I have a law practice, yournurseattorney.com, and I also mentor nurses on how to grow business at empowerednurses.org, past tense, empowerednurses.org. I'm thrilled to be here. Thank you, Bridget.
It's my pleasure, and this is right up your alley because you are a lawyer. So, in uh, in Arkansas, there was a federal lawsuit claiming detainees at Washington County Jail they were given uh, Ivermectin to treat COVID without their knowledge nor consent, and it was settled for 10,000, according to the American Civil Liberties of Union of Arkansas, which they're each going to get about $2,000, which is not much, but I'm very glad that this lawsuit was brought forth. The lawsuit contends detainees were given, I believe it's ivermectin, as early as November 2020, and didn't become aware of what the treatment was until July 2021. This medication is an FDA approved drug to address parasitic infections such as intestinal worms, head lice, and some skin conditions such as rosacea. It isn't and wasn't at the time approved to treat COVID-19. And the biggest concern here is that they were not aware of this. They were essentially treating them like lab rats. And just because they're inmates, they still have rights and they're still human beings. And this should not be going on. So, Lori, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I agree that they had to give them informed consent. And if they have to be able to accept or reject. Otherwise, like you said, we're performing medical experimentation on unwitting people.
Yes. And that is exactly what is concerning because many times and there's systems in place to help prevent this, but many times um, the underprivileged, minorities, the most vulnerable population are the ones that are being taken advantage of. And a lot of times inmates many of their rights have been stripped away and they probably feel like they can't say no. And not only that, we're taught in our upbringing to trust healthcare professionals. Oh, if they say this, then it must be correct. But what are your recommendations to help protect ourselves whenever we're getting treatment? How can we advocate for ourselves and prevent this from happening?
Well, you should always ask, what are you getting and why? You know, what are they prescribing and why? But I also think going back to what you were saying about the review boards, like for experimental medications and things like that, it would be really easy to just use the prisoners as subjects for clinical trials for medications. But they can't do that because it has to go through I think it's the IRB, and that's why we have the Nuremberg Code. It's so that everybody gets full informed consent about about if they're in a clinical practice trial or anything or getting a medication. They need to have full informed consent, and that's what was violated here. I'm wondering, if the amount 2,000 was low because it could affect their benefits or it could affect other things if they got more money. Just curiosity.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I don't think that they discuss that. Um, Real quick, I wanted to touch on what the IRB is and the Institutional Review Board. It's an administrative body established to protect the rights and welfare of human research subjects recruited to participate in research activities conducted under the auspices of the institution with which it is affiliated. And part of this was put into place because of the Tuskegee syphilis experiment. Lori, did you want to kind of give a summary on this a little bit about what this is and what it was about?
I believe that African American males were given this experimental treatment and were not told about it. So again, that is in violation of the Nuremberg Code, and statutes and regulations. Every state has them on what constitutes full informed consent.
And what is the Nuremberg Code again?
That came from Nazi Germany, where Dr. Mencken was experimenting on people and doing unnecessary surgeries and doing all kinds of stuff, experimenting on the prisoners, the Jewish people who were held captive there without their knowledge or consent. And after that, the Nuremberg Code was formed for all countries. And again, every state has some kind of statute on what constitutes proper informed consent.
I'm just going to type to Nikki. Nikki says, I wonder why that happened, treating without disclosing the medication. And she's exactly right. It should not have happened. So the
And
inmates,
so why wasn't the nurse who's administering these meds saying, here is your ivermectin, here is your medication for X, like we do? And the nurses should have been doing that.
yes, and that's another good point is we can also report when we know that something is not above board, we should be reporting it. We are our patient advocates, asking the physician, has this trial or experiment been approved by the IRB? Because, and I don't think I found, but essentially, I had found it on my phone previously, but not on, I didn't pull up the browser. Essentially, any experiment that is going to have human test subjects needs to be approved by the IRB. So, and he did not obtain approval. So the inmates received Dr. Carr's treatment protocol for COVID-19, but did not know it included ivermectin. Brooks wrote, Dr. Carras and his staff falsely told the inmates the treatment consisted of mere vitamins, antibiotics, and or steroids. Critically, the inmates had no idea they were part of Dr. Carr's experiment. And since the detainees were never told their COVID treatments contained ivermectin, they were never warned about the drug's side effects. In addition, Karras hypothesized large doses of ivermectin would be most effective in combating COVID 19. And we know that a lot of side effects are dose dependent. So the higher the dose, the more risk for side effects that these individuals are going to have. The problem, however, was the FDA only approved a dosage of 0.2 milligrams per kilogram to treat worms, according to Brooks. Carras ultimately prescribed lower doses of ivermectin to his clinic patients and higher doses to his imprisoned patients. So essentially, it's like, oh, let me treat clinic patients more conservatively, and then I'm going to take more risks with the inmates.
Now, of course, prescribers have the option to prescribe medications off label, and that's fine, but you don't have the option to treat somebody without telling them what you're treating them for and what you're giving them so they can make informed consent.
Exactly. And that is the biggest issue here, that they were not told A, what they were getting. They weren't even asked if they wanted to participate or not.
Yeah, and what I'm wondering is if this Dr. Karras and the nurses got reported to the board too, and what the board is going to do.
So it said, after first reading, it would seem highly unlikely, even implausible, that a doctor would have dosed his incarcerated patients with an experimental drug more aggressively than his private patients, but plaintiffs point to proof in their jail medical records. So I don't remember seeing
Yeah,
if
it
they
says
did report him to the board though. Oh.
The Arkansas State Medical Board voted to take no action,
Hmm.
um, which is surprising, but and I wouldn't be surprised too if the nurses had action taken against their license because it's a different board. And I've seen that happen before, like with Dr. Husted in
Mhm.
Ohio, the one that overprescribed fentanyl.
So I mean, this is highly unethical, and I'm actually surprised that they voted to take no action. Brooks said that the courts haven't hesitated to find that where the human research subjects weren't told that they were participating in an experiment and or the government conducted the experiments knowing they had no therapeutic value. The subject's constitutionally protected right to life and or liberty had been violated. Separately, the court finds that the facts in the amended complaint, if true, shock the conscience. And I'm glad again that this was brought to court because this opens essentially a can of worms. It's like, if this were allowed, what else can they start experimenting with inmates on? And it's just not right. It's not right. Like I said, even though they're inmates, even though they're incarcerated, they're still human beings. They have rights in regards to what is being done to their body, and they should not be subjected to uh, experimental drugs that are not FDA approved without their consent, just for in the name of science. They're not guinea pigs. They're not lab rats. Karas, in a follow-up motion for summary judgment filed in July, disputed he was experimenting on detainees. That doesn't make it any better. The motion argued if a drug is approved by the FDA for one purpose, it's permissible to use the drug for other purposes at a physician's discretion. And this is what you were talking about in regards to using things off-label.
Mhm.
Can you tell us a little bit about what off-label means?
So there's lots of medications that are prescribed off-label, especially to migraine patients. I mean, they prescribe all kinds of things off-label. This was before they had invented like Imitrex and medications like sumatriptan, medications like that. But prior to that, they would give, headache patients like antidepressants. They'd give them um, a blood pressure med, anything that they could think of off label to try and help the person. And again, that if you do something off label, the whole purpose is to help something when nothing is helping and to try other things. Whereas in this situation, this was a pure experiment and these people didn't even have a choice. And it's like, giving patients in a nursing home something without their knowledge or their family's knowledge and consent. It's the same thing. I know that some doctors were trying to use this ivermectin prophylactically, and I
Mhm.
don't know if that's what they were trying to do in the jail setting because of the close proximity of everybody and the opportunity for spread. I'm not sure.
Yeah. So, in a September court filing, Karas contended ACLU attorneys used the term experiment to impugn Karas in national news media coverage, by saying he engaged in a medical experiment or medical experimentation on detainees. And the court essentially approved a resolution by a 9-4 vote praising Karas for his treatment of detainees and staff during the COVID pandemic. Um, I guess this is like the other side of it, that the resolution of there had been more than 850 cases of the infection in the jail with no deaths. Uh, Again, we don't have all of the details. Was he using this prophylactically? But there have been deaths. There have been individuals that were taking this is often given to horses. So they were obtaining it from veterinarians and taking essentially overdosing themselves.
Yeah, it's over the counter at, feed stores for horses. But again, that's very different than the ivermectin for people, and the dosage, obviously, for a horse is very different than for a person.
And there was an influencer that, I'm sure there's more, but there was one that I was reading right before this that actually uh, passed away due to taking too much of it. So, as I mentioned previously, the IRB was instituted after the Tuskegee syphilis experiment. And this was an experiment, it was a clinical study conducted between 1932 and 1972 in Alabama. And it involved 400 African Americans. Most of them were illiterate. So, again, here we go with the like minorities, underserved population. Uh, Low lack of education so that they feel that they can take advantage of them, and they were studied to observe the natural progression of untreated syphilis up to their eventual death by the disease. The reason why this was unethical is because they had two groups, and they withheld treatment essentially. So that they by withholding treatment, they essentially caused the deaths of these individuals. So, subjects involved in this experiment did not give their informed consent. Again, with the inmates in this case that did not give their informed consent, they were not informed of their diagnosis, and they were told that they were being treated for bad blood. They were also told that if they participated and they study, they would be given free medical care, free transportation to the clinic, free meals, and free burial insurance in the case of death. And subjects were also warned to avoid penicillin, which was already in use with other patients nearby. Uh, so in 1932, treatment for syphilis were very toxic, dangerous, had questionable effectiveness, blah, blah, blah. Penicillin had become the treatment of choice for syphilis. And the Tuskegee experiment led to the Belmont Report of 1979 and the creation of the National Human Investigation Board, as well as the request for the creation of the IRB. So in this experiment here, there's so much skepticism and distrust of the healthcare profession among minorities. And this specific experiment is one of the reasons why. But I did want to point out that this was a pivotal situation that caused laws to be put into place that caused changes. So, yes, it was very tragic and highly unethical, should not have happened, but there were changes instituted so that ideally, I mean, as we see with this inmate experiment, is it the system perfect? No, because it still can happen. But there have been huge improvements where most experiments now are ethical. They do go through the IRB, and individuals aren't being withheld treatment that leads to their demise. Did you have anything else to add, Lori?
No, but you're absolutely right that the minorities, they're because of this are very concerned about medical experimentation on them, and so they don't seek healthcare and they're afraid because they don't want to be experimented on.
And things that even so, I'm Colombian, and a lot of things that I will hear from minorities, and sometimes I feel like they can open up, or they will open up to me, whether just it's a friend talking to me or me as the nurse practitioner. They'll say things like, "Oh, well, they just want to make money." Like, "Oh, they keep asking for follow-up appointments because they just want to make money off of me." The pharma company wants, so there's so much distrust still. And I do want to point out that most healthcare providers have your safety and your benefit is the utmost priority, and we really are trying to help you. And if we're asking, for example, for a follow-up visit, it's because we want to see if the treatment is working, if it's effective, if your labs are still within range. But when we read about things like these inmates being experimented on unethically, it's a step back in that in building that trust and that foundation.
Right.
And I
Right.
know that law is very expansive, and so I'm not sure, if you're going to be able to help me with this, but any advice for family members that maybe have loved ones in prison? How can they advocate for themselves in the prison system?
Yeah, I'm really not familiar with it, at all. So
Mhm.
I have had a couple malpractice cases from, um, with prisoners that weren't treated properly because they would be, their condition would be declining and they don't send them to the hospital. One had an appendix burst and in one of the cases I had, another one was, um I can't remember, but yeah, I've had a number of them. And again, I'm not sure, but again, just like anything, whether your loved one's in a hospital or whether they're in prison or whether they're in a nursing home, the more you go and check up and see what's going on, the better they're treated, in my experience.
So those cases that were brought up against, like, for example, the appendix bursting, was it family members that fought? Is it
Yeah,
family members that brought the lawsuit?
yeah, yeah.
Okay. So yeah, so essentially, if you have a loved one that's in prison, then advocating for them on their behalf because they may not be able to. And I do volunteer at prison, and that the guys do tell me a lot of things and stories. So it's unfortunate, and it shouldn't be happening, but mistreatment does occur.
And as with anything, put your concerns in writing so you have a paper trail. Otherwise, how are you ever going to prove that you express concerns about something?
That's an excellent point. It's better, like you said, if you send an email, or and I mean, an email, you have a digital footprint, whereas even if you send a letter, you don't really have a proof that it was sent or it was read. But yes, having something in writing is essential, because if you do speak with someone, write down who you spoke to, on what date, what was discussed. This is just something that I from the Washington State Department of Health, that it was just saying that ivermectin should not be used to treat COVID-19. Um,
But now there's tons of peer review scientific literature that says ivermectin can be used and it's effective, but it doesn't mean our FDA has approved it for it.
Yeah, and I think again, it's like the data is conflicting. Some say it does have it stops viral replication, and that it has anti-inflammatory properties. But I think like the FDA's stance, or this is the NIH, so they still well, let me see when this was. This was March 6, 2023. The panel recommends against the use of ivermectin for the treatment of COVID-19, but let me see where they say uh, pharmacokinetic and pharmacodynamic studies suggest that achieving the plasma concentration necessary for antiviral efficacy would require administration of doses up to 100-fold higher than those approved for use in humans. So it does help with prevent viral replication, but the dosage has to be so high that they're saying that they're recommending against it. Mhm. Well, Lori, thank you so much for joining me. I know you said you had a limited amount of time. Any other uh, last thoughts that you wanted to leave us with, or words of wisdom?
For those of you practicing, again, just make sure that you tell your patients what you're giving and what you're prescribing and why, and make sure you get informed consent, and always document it. Always document, discussed new prescription for whatever and the reason why, and that they understand, they verbalized understanding of the medication's actions, side effects, the risks, benefits of using it, so that you cover yourself.
And then the last question I had for you is, let's say you are a nurse and you see something unethical going on, even with a nurse practitioner or physician. I mean, nurse practitioner, we know, reported to the nursing board, but would those be the same steps, reporting it to their medical board? Or in this situation, who should have been told that this was occurring?
I would go up your own chain of the command first before you report it. I would let them report it, honestly, um, rather than you. But if you feel that um, it's important to report it, then do it yourself. But I would go up the chain of command and let them do it, because they're in a better position to know whether it needs to be reported or what, or to deal with the situation.
Mhm. Okay, Lori, thank you so much. I really appreciate you joining us today.
My pleasure, Bridget. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye. Uh, any of the viewers have any thoughts before I log off in regards to what we were discussed today? I see that a few of you are still live. Or any other requests for future videos? Well, thank you so much for joining. Again, today I discussed that inmates were unknowingly treated with ivermectin, and they won the lawsuit. They won $2,000 each. It was a lawsuit of about $10,000, which isn't a whole lot of money, but at least it was something that was brought to the court, and they were found that they were in their right. And this is like at the end of the day, this is I if you're going to be a part of an experiment, they need to give informed consent. And this is why I try to also buy, for example, I try to be as ethical as possible. So inmates should have never been inmates should have never been exposed to this or been part of this. And then also another area of unethical treatment is with animal testing and the conditions that animal testing are conducted. So I encourage you to try to buy, if you're a woman or a man that wears makeup, try to buy cruelty free products, because animal testing is another area that is very inhumane. And if you're a nurse and you see any unethical treatment going on, like Lori said, go up your chain of command, but also feel free to report it to the appropriate nursing boards or medical boards. Thank you so much for watching. Make sure you hit that like button, subscribe. You can always watch the playback. I'll probably post this just as a normal video later on. Everyone have a great day and happy Friday.